Welcome everybody here and who will watch in the future. We're very excited about this event, which is essentially our launch of a podcast that LYTE Collective got to be a part of in collaboration with Change Agents and Juneteenth Productions. And so my name is Casey Holtschneider. I'm the executive director of LYTE Collective. And I'm really excited for this panel tonight where we're going to dive in a bit to some of what we thought were some pretty cool and also challenging things about the podcast and the topics that we were talking about. And so before I do that, to give a little bit more context to how this all came to be, I wanted to ask Maurice if you feel comfortable just sharing a little bit about Juneteenth Productions and what you all do. And then Jeb, we'll switch to you and kind of a little bit about how you got involved and how this whole project sort of launched off.
Absolutely. So Change Agents, the podcast, is produced by a company called Juneteenth Productions. We're going into our 25th year of production, and we specialize in social justice media, which is what Change Agents is. Change Agents is a podcast that brings young, emerging rock star journalists like Jeb together with progressive nonprofits like LYTE Collective, who are doing amazing work to tell a story of grassroots change. And hopefully the journalists form very close relationships with the organizations. I think that was the case here. And they're able to tell stories from the inside out, we like to say, in the voice of those who are living the experience, the lived experience of those who are involved. That's Change Agents, and we hope that you all tune in at changeagentsthepodcast.com. You can find us there or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Maurice, and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this beautiful thing that you all have created. And to that end, I want to introduce the folks who were a part of that wonderful thing. So I am going to kind of go around the panel. I don't know if Nicole, if they are pinned anymore, but if there's a way to sort of identify our panelists, I'll just sort of call you out here. But Carl, I guess starting with you, if you just want to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then Shawne, I'll come over to you and Jeb sort of round it out with you.
Sure. Yeah, I can definitely do that. My name is Carl Wiley. I'm the Chief Creative Officer for LYTE Collective. In addition to supporting young people connecting to housing supports, I also run a lot of our arts programming at LYTE Collective, including our recording studio, and also where Shawne edits some of her videos in there as well. So yeah, a lot of our creative programming is something that I oversee.
Hi, everybody. My name is Shawne Hinkle. I'm the culinary coordinator here at the LYTE Collective. I'm also kind of like a youth advocate, as somebody who had lived experiences and kind of maneuvered through certain systems that we are currently building a new concept around. So just here to kind of utilize my story to kind of help in restructuring, how we help young people based off my experience and my overall knowledge of lived experience, as well as my passions through what I'm building here at the LYTE Collective through my cafe. So.
Hey, Casey, if you could get Shawne a little closer to the mic.
My apologies. Can you hear me better?
Yeah.
Okay.
But
yes.
Did we catch any of that?
Did we get any of that, or is there?
No, we heard it all. It just
okay.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Perfect.
No, we definitely heard it all.
All right, great. Thank you so much. So Carl and Shawne, for those of you who have a chance to listen to the full episode, which we've linked in our social media, and we've dropped the link here in the chat too as well, our featured kind of who I think Jeb spent the most time with through this process. And I also got to spend a little bit of time with Jeb too, which I'm excited to dive into. But with that, Jeb, I'll turn it over to you. Tell us about you.
Sure, yeah. Thanks for the introduction. So I'm Jeb Backe. I'm a freelance journalist that I'm working with Juneteenth Productions on the Change Agents podcast. I was brought in specifically to work on this piece to focus in particular on youth homelessness in Chicago. It's the type of advocacy media work that I believe really strongly in. So it was kind of a no-brainer to get involved with this group, and by this group I both mean change agents as well as LYTE Collective, both really great organizations, and it's been an enlightening experience for me as well. I'm always kind of in a learning state, so this has been like a really amazing experience for me as well, being educated about this, and doing my best to get the information out there. So grateful to be a part of it.
Well, thank you so much, Jeb. We were really, really lucky to partner with you. I want to start with you. If that's okay, I'm going to dive in here. Let's just get it off. Let's get it rolling.
Sure.
And Jeb, I'm wondering, this is more of a process question. So as you think about it, I'm just curious about your approach to this whole thing, kind of as diving into making this podcast, not really knowing us, maybe learning a lot about this issue of youth homelessness. Sort of, how did you think about kind of your approach to diving into this work?
Yeah, I think where it all begins is the process kind of set forth by Juneteenth Productions. I was very grateful for the building of a relationship kind of with our workshops and our process of getting to know each other, and building the kind of keystone elements of what we wanted to look at. And that was with Carl. Carl and I think, were able to spend a lot of time together in those early weeks, just really fine-tuning, what exactly we want to focus on with this, because, when it comes down to it, we're looking at a pretty immense kind of tangled mess of issues. So it really began with these long conversations that I think Carl and I had, and I would kind of repeat the conversations with Carl over and over again, just so that I could even get the information in my brain, because there's a lot. And I think it was this combination of talking to someone like Carl, who's been involved in the social work system for as long as he has, doing my own research. I was very grateful, Casey, that you posted your research online, so I was able to read through that. But of course, nothing really beats actually just speaking to folks about their own experiences, which is why I'm especially grateful for Shawne to be so open with me and spend time with me about her own experiences with housing instability. And it really was, that was probably the most enlightening and the most I kind of gained from the whole process. So I feel like I've kind of gone into a different direction than maybe your question asked, but that was really where I think the crux of getting everything, getting every bit of information in place was kind of a combination of all of those things.
Well, I think you went in the perfect direction, but it's what's it like to be on the other side now, the one being asked the questions. But that's a beautiful transition, because Shawne, I actually wanted to come to you first, and we have Jeb's picked a couple of clips, a few clips for us to kind of hear from the podcast, and I wanted to start us with one of those here. And Shawne, in particular, you gave us a real gift in the sharing of your story, and that was a gift you didn't have to give to us or to people, and you through that, though, allowed, I think, so many of these issues that we're facing systemically, so many of the problems that young people are facing systemically, that you brought out in such powerful ways. And in particular, I'm thinking about you tell, there's a clip where you tell the story around kind of leaving some very difficult things only to find some more difficult things. And I'm wondering if we could take a listen to that clip, Jeb, and then talk a little bit about that. So I think that's the Becoming Free clip.
Yep, that sounds great. Let me go ahead and just do a little bit of screen sharing here. It'll just take me a moment. All right, is everyone seeing this now? All right, great. So I'm going to go ahead and play this. So, yep, as Casey said, the the kind of context of this was Shawne kind of speaking, and we'll hear Shawne's side of this, but my understanding is the context, at least of the clip, was Shawne needing to get out of the housing situation that she was in, but finding that there were actually some more difficulties along the way.
Suffice to say, the difficulty Shawne faced for wanting to be herself was becoming too much.
What I do remember is just feeling completely out of place, feeling isolated, just feeling kind of just torn. And that was when I knew, like, I had to escape. I had to get out of here. But having to go through that process of bouncing and moving from place to place to place, that was something that I didn't expect to have to experience, because I looked at it as such a simple thing. Like, hey, I just want to be free, be me. Yeah, I had no choice. If I wanted to become better and have a better life and kind of change the environment that I was in, it would be like that.
Shawne, as I think about that clip,
kind of generalized about that.
Yeah. Can you tell us more about it?
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, that's exactly what I was gonna say. Is like, talk about that. Tell us more about what you were thinking.
So again, I'll kind of generalize that, but kind of specifically what I was speaking on is like at that time where I was kind of trying to figure out like what was happening around me and what I wanted to do about it. It was more so my housing situation, because kind of to give like a scenario to kind of go into like what we talked about here. So I was living with a parent, and technically I was housed, but I felt very uncomfortable in my environment. Like, it was so many different things happening. Like, it didn't seem like a environment where it invited productivity. It invited like a sense of doing things to better me. So like there wasn't any type of encouragement as far as like pursuing a career, or going for like anything you're passionate about. If anything, it was kind of something that rejected that. And as somebody that was already passionate about wanting to accomplish so many things, like ever since I can remember, I was always into so many different things. I'm a very creative person, so I was into extracurricular activities, sports, like anything where I always had like a thirst for knowledge, a thirst for learning things, and kind of being that creative, in that capacity. And unfortunately, I was in an environment that didn't support that. And I, on top of that, I felt so restricted in general, as far as me wanting to just live. Again, I was under somebody else's roof, so it's only so many things that I was able to do. And because of all those different restrictions and things, I just had this feeling like I have to figure out a way to get out of this. And at that time, I was like just out of high school. I know that was like another thing we mentioned in the panel. Like, I just finished high school. I couldn't go to school, so I had to figure out what am I going to do. I'm like 18, going on 19. So I just had this optimistic thing where, okay, I'm just going to get my own place. Like, I'm just going to move out. And like me at that time, I didn't realize like the process that I had to go through would become so like ongoing, and so many barriers I would have to face, and so many hurdles would like kind of come about in that process. I just kind of looked at it as a very simple thing. Like, I'm gonna get a job, get an apartment, and pursue what it is that I wanted to pursue, whether it was like finding a trade, or being able to find a school here in the city, and just kind of living happily ever after. But unfortunately, on top of the fact that I was only 18, which most places at that time, you couldn't get a place, and the fact that I didn't have much I didn't have any experience as far as working. It was really hard, and actually having to go through this whole homeless system was definitely like something I didn't expect. So that was kind of like the major thing that I was kind of speaking on, is not really expecting all these different hurdles that I would have to jump over just by simply wanting to do better and, you know, pursue like what I thought was a simple life. Because for me, it was just having a safe place where I can have my own place, go to school, and pretty much just follow that same thing that, you know, we are taught to do. Like, you're supposed to go to school, get a job, and, you know, kind of follow that. And in that time, that's kind of what I was looking forward to doing. And unfortunately, the system, on top of my environment that I was leaving didn't welcome that, and the system that I kind of like indirectly had to go within did not welcome that. If anything, it kind of made more restrictions towards getting that. So that was definitely the big thing that I kind of was speaking on for that clip, for sure.
No. Sorry, is that a weird turn? Hello. I think this, because you really opened the door through that, and thank you for extending that to the story to even, so why are all of these systemic hurdles happening? Why is it the fact that you needed this help, you went out, and then you faced closed door after closed door after closed door after closed door? And Carl, I think in the podcast, sorry, you really focused in on a couple of these big areas where, I mean, we know that there are more than that, but you talked about a couple in particular that are pretty heavy and I think we deal with every day, and kind of brought those to light in a beautiful way. And so one of those was this idea of kind of the definition of homelessness that you have to meet to be able to get help. And Jeb, I'm wondering if we could maybe play that clip with Carl. And then Carl, if you can talk a little bit more about that for folks that might not be so familiar, and other hurdles that you see.
Yes, definitely. So we're talking about the definitions of homelessness. Yep.
Yeah, thanks.
The majority of young people that I've supported over the years tend to just not engage with the shelter system at all. When you look at the data, the vast majority of youth that are housing unstable are sleeping on couches, and they're bouncing from couch to couch, from friend's house to friend's house.
This makes sense. It's definitely so much more comfortable to stay on a friend's couch rather than sleeping in an uncomfortable shelter. But here's the thing.
That's typically not counted as experiencing homelessness by the HUD definition.
The majority of youth experiencing homelessness are not counted and not provided with support. And that's just one of the barriers. There are also age cutoffs for who can receive youth-specific support. These restrictions can pile on top of the difficulties a young person would already be facing.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Carl, I just want to like open it up as you think about that as an issue, but also like other barriers that you're seeing, you know, all the time, day in and out, trying to help young people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I think that also, you know, Shawne alluded to a lot of the sort of things that I've been seeing in the work that I've been doing, but one of the ones that I had touched on was around this issue with the definition of homelessness, and that is, it's a pretty low-hanging fruit when you think about it, just sort of codifying what it is we're talking about. That's something that I think we as a country should be able to do, but depending on which federal agency you're talking to, they might have a different definition of what it is to be housing unstable. So particularly for the demographic that we support at LYTE Collective, a lot of students and a lot of young people are experiencing homelessness, and that they would fall under the education system or Department of Ed. They have a different definition. They use what's called McKinney-Vento, and under that, they're able to consider couch surfing as a definition of homelessness. So they would count under that project. But HUD, which is Housing and Urban Development, the sort of federal body that oversees all of housing support for the United States, doesn't count that. And so it doesn't count couch surfing as someone experiencing homelessness. So that's a pretty serious disconnect between, depending on what system you're in, whether you're going to get the support you need, whether you're going to actually be able to get connected to housing. For an example of that, so Department of Ed, the education system counted over 1 million youth experiencing homelessness last year, which I would estimate as a pretty large undercount, but that's a whole separate discussion for a different day. Whereas HUD, in the most recent data that came to in 2022, they do a report to Congress around the data they're seeing across the country. HUD only cited 130,000 youth that they had identified as experiencing homelessness. So that's like 10 times different. And that's just because the definitions are that far off. And by by far the largest housing situation I think folks are experiencing is couch surfing. The more you look at it, folks are whether they're on a couch, they might be sleeping in someone's garage, in a basement, on someone's floor. That's all doubled up, and that is all not counted as facing homelessness under HUD. So under the Department of Ed, there are some useful things that do happen under McKinney-Vento, where like students are able to get access to things like extra support in school for uniforms, reduced lunches. They get certain fees and books waived, and you can also get some transportation covered. But critically, what Department of Ed doesn't offer is housing. So they'll sort of do a lot of the different peripheral supports, but there's no housing there. And then HUD doesn't consider you as facing homelessness. So there's a massive chasm between what you need and what you can receive as a student, and that's just because of the definition. And there were 2 bills that were floated in Congress, and surprisingly, considering all the things happening in this country, they actually had bipartisan support for them. But they stalled out in committee, and so that was one of the ways that we could have actually addressed this issue, just having one unified definition, but it wasn't able to happen.
Yeah, Shawne, you wanted to add some pieces to Carl's? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that. And just to give like kind of like the scenario of what like Carl was speaking on. So my situation was I now know the term, which is precariously housed, which is basically it is when you are in a place that you either feel endangered or like you're there, but it's not necessarily a guarantee that you can be there, or you just don't feel comfortable in that space. And along with couch surfing, precariously housed is kind of like what I was considered the situation I was in. And unfortunately, at that time, I didn't know that. I didn't have that knowledge because, again, starting my journey, I just thought that homelessness meant exactly what HUD defines as homelessness is. It's like you're living somewhere where it wouldn't be considered to be humanely, like it's not a place that humans are supposed to reside. And because of that, I had a lot of setback as far as how like if I do decide to reach out to certain resources, are they going to help me, or are they going to kind of turn me away because I'm like technically you're under a roof, so you're housed, and you just have to figure it out. And a lot of that kind of made me where I almost had to kind of stretch the truth and kind of over exaggerate the circumstances, even though the circumstances was bad, but I didn't realize like if I tell people like I'm in a place where I just don't feel comfortable, it's too much happening, like people are not getting along, they're gonna look at it as like that's just what it is. So I had to kind of say, well, I'm almost make it urgent where I can get that help because of those definitions that I only had that type of knowledge around. And it wasn't until I came across like TLP and like other programs to help me better understand it. There are various forms of unstable housing, like couch surfing. Like if you're in a place where you're not on a lease or it's not your place where you're actually living independently, then that's not considered housed. It's unstable housing. Any place where you can be there and one day somebody can decide to kick you out, that's not housed. If you're living in a place where you can't sleep or you can't study or you can't do anything because people are fighting, people are drinking, people are up all night, like no one's getting along, that's like unstable housing because it's an environment that you cannot produce anything positive or you can't be yourself or you're obtaining trauma with. And unfortunately, it took me to have to go through this whole system to learn it because of all these, which was basically the big barrier that a lot of people like myself has faced, like being so restrictive from reaching out because they feel like they're not going to get help because they like your situation doesn't count. You have to pretty much be in a urgent, like really messed up place to actually get help when in actuality any circumstances where you're not like making any type of progress would be considered unstable. And that's kind of like what kind of Carl broke down as far as how a lot of the systems are pretty much built. That is a big barrier for a lot of people.
I want to pull right on something you just said, to another one of the barriers. And Jeb, I'm going to come to you because you were talking about how you almost have to be, I mean, you use the exact language, right? It's sort of, HUD uses this definition, as Carl was talking about, places not meant for human habitation. And in the city of Chicago, right, there is, as there are many cities across the country, a process that is supposed to coordinate entry into programs, and it's actually only for people that meet this very, very strict definition of being street-based or emergency shelter-based. And even with that very small group of people, as Carl just shared with us, represents, depending on as we're talking about, I mean, sometimes less than 10 to 15% of people experiencing homelessness in this country. We still can't get those folks housed. And that is making me think of another really important clip, Carl, in a conversation that you and Jeb had around that list here in Chicago. And Jeb, I'm curious about your reactions to this one, because it was one of, I think you and Carl were finding out some new data together kind of in this process. And yeah, I wonder if we can play that clip. And then Jeb, I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts, kind of coming in from the outside, if that was surprising and what you thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a good lead in. I'll also say this, you know, the clip that we're playing is a follow-up, basically, where we had initially, when we initially had our first conversation, we thought that we had all the data, but as the episode was being produced, as Carl and I continued conversation, Carl wrote me to say that actually the data had in fact changed fairly significantly, which is what we're going to see now. Let me pull this up. And yeah, what Casey was referring to is the one list. So you'll hear Carl talking about the one list, and the one list is this list that if you do reach all of these different stipulations that HUD says you must meet in order to be considered homeless, you get on this one list, and it is one list in which they poll for government assisted housing. So here's kind of some information regarding how long it generally takes to have your name pulled actually from the one list to receive this government assisted housing.
More up-to-date statistics have come to the surface. Here's a follow-up from Carl.
They have published a report that includes some of this new data. It's in their new report called Data Highlights from Chicago's Homeless Service System Q1 and Q2. But in that report, they mentioned that the average number of days it takes to get connected to housing was around 1,500 days. I was shocked.
Though once the shock wore off for Carl, things did start to add up a bit more.
It is more reflective, I think, of my experience in supporting people, but it's just sort of shocking to see that that's the average number of days, meaning that there's a proportion of people that it's taking longer than 1,500 days to get housing support through the city of Chicago.
Yeah, so that was really something. I mean, Jeb, I guess I am just curious about, sort of, as someone who isn't steeped in it every day, kind of that number was even, like Carl, you said, like even for a moment I had to call and check that was, make sure, and we're in it every day, right? Knowing this, kind of your thoughts as you were learning that together with Carl. And then Carl, maybe if you want to even talk a little bit more about it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of one of those interesting things, and Carl kind of goes on to talk about this later in the episode, which is basically what he gets at is, you know, this is why you see, you know, so many people riding the trains all night, and folks in so many different situations where they're sleeping outside or in tents and different encampments and things like that. It's one of those things where the information is so rattling, but it is kind of almost, it's one of those things that's so strange and so wild, but also it kind of makes sense when you look more generally at, you know, what your lived experience is walking around the city of Chicago. You know, I'm always running into folks that don't have that kind of housing support, that are having these kind of difficulties. So it's it's unfortunately shocking, but at the same time, we do see it. We see it every day. But almost sometimes we need, at least in my experience, I felt that it was one of those wake-up calls where having someone like Carl almost like point it out to me, and saying, oh, right, that is what I'm seeing every day when I'm walking around Chicago.
Yeah. And I apologize too. I'm getting little notifications that my internet's unstable. So if my screen freezes, hopefully it's not a really good looking, face I'm making. But yeah, that conversation with Jeb, that was, in my process of doing this work, I've done this for a long time, and I've helped back before we had this coordinated entry one list system, back when it was just sort of a free for all of social workers making phone calls. Until now, right, I've been able to do this, and I've seen how long it's taken. So the city of Chicago is part of what's called the COC, which is the regional body that oversees all the HUD funding and tracks all the data. And there's every community across the country is part of one of these different groups. And our group here in Chicago posted the data available. So you could see the amount of time it takes till housing. You could see how many people are entering and exiting the system, and how many youth and veterans and families. And it was very useful. But some of that data is now missing. But it used to say back in the day that it was like 260 days or so for young people to get access to housing. It was around 260 or so days. So when I went back, just in my conversation with Jeb, I want to make sure I had the most up-to-date information. So I went back and checked, couldn't find it. It's not publicly available, but did dig through some reports where they had this number listed, that the average number of days it's taking now is 1,500. And I was pretty stunned. That's like a little over 4 years. And that's average. And there's a lot of folks that's taking much longer. And that's when you do everything right? Like you're in line, you're waiting, and it's over 4 years. And so I reached out to the team and I was like, just to make sure, am I seeing this number correctly? And they were like, yes, that's correct. But they quickly sort of moved me to looking at different numbers. And they were like, well, these numbers here, they really were talking about what's called between match to housing. So that's the number that they were like, we wanted you to focus in on this, which is once you've applied, you wait a really long time, and then you're matched with a program that fits your need. And once you've made that match, you're then offered housing and you get keys eventually. So the time from being matched with a program to getting keys is 79 days. They said, just make sure to look at that data. Don't look at 1,500, look at the 79 days. But to me, that's not the appropriate way to view this, right? If I'm a person who's looking for help and I call asking for help, it's from when I call to when I get housing, right? That's really the true measure of how fast the system's working to support me. I wouldn't, you don't have to break it down into smaller numbers. It is what it is. That's our number. We should focus on that. And further, I was talking to Jeb that I think it's disingenuous to not focus on that number, right? To not focus on 1,500 days. Even saying that 79 days is an achievement, I think that's more of a problem. If anything, that's showing you that even when you are selected for a housing outcome, it then takes you 80 more days. The program says they want you want the program, and then it takes 80 days to get you keys to that program. That is, in my mind, that's pointing from one failure to another failure. And so I thought that was pretty egregious. And then the last thing I'll say too is that that's just right. We're talking about HUD funded housing. You also have CHA in the city of Chicago, which is another sort, housing network. That network measures its housing wait lists, not in days, not in weeks, not in months, in decades. They measure their wait list for housing in decades. It's typically 25 years before you get to housing. And back when I started as a social worker a long time ago, they would say, oh, it's 5 to 10 years. They just keep adding decades to this list. It doesn't, these numbers aren't reducing. There was an alderman, Jeanette Taylor, who is now a Chicago alderman. She had applied to get housing through CHA in 1993, and she received a call that she was on the top of the list in 2022. So all of her kids are grown, they're gone. I mean, that's the system that we're working with. So even when you do things right, it can take you multiple decades to get any housing support. So it's shocking. I do this work, this is my job, and it still stuns me how much of an abject failure it is on most days, and why we see the city in the way it is and the folks that are suffering the way they are. It's because of these failures.
Yeah, Thank you, Carl. I mean, I think it was really important in the podcast. And Jeb, you also did such beautiful work of this balance between so much is going like devastatingly wrong and has been for so long. But also representing the beauty of like LYTE is sort of born out of that pain, and trying to figure out how do we actually reduce the harm kind of in the here and now. And I wanted to switch gears a little bit and actually talk about some of that, like on the side of what we're hoping to build. And I mean, it is really the dark and grave truth that we could talk about sort of how many problems they are deep within this system, and for a long time. And so I really also, I want to give some space, because Shawne, you've said some beautiful things about what you're building here, about other stuff to kind of talk about that. And I'll start. Also, I think it's a real honor, actually, Mark Matini, to have you on this, because folks who don't know Mark, I won't put you on the spot, but was very much foundational to the visioning of LYTE Collective and thinking through. And we're gonna play a little clip here, Mark, that's gonna make you smile in a second. But Jeb, I'm wondering if we could play the clip where you and I were talking, because I also had a chance to talk with Jeb for a bit, and we had a great conversation in thinking about Mark. Dr. Matani was with me when I was doing the research, and so it actually helped supervise that research. So it's really special to have you here in this moment. And Jeb, I'm wondering if maybe, would you feel okay about playing that clip, and we could talk a little bit about some of the founding of LYTE, and then Carl and Shawne, I want to turn it over to you to talk about like what you vision here, what you're excited about doing here, what is being built here.
Absolutely. Yeah, happy to go ahead and do that. Let me pull this up once more. Okay, great. And I believe you're referring to this clip, which is mostly for a little bit of context. Casey had been speaking to me about her research, and a lot of her research was kind of resolving around these long-term studies of folks that she had been working with one-on-one within her work as a social worker. And the work was largely basically seeing, after folks had received care, what their long-term turnout was after that initial set of care. And this is kind of what she found out as she was doing this research.
They hit crisis again, and I would say to them, like, why didn't you, I was still there, like, why didn't you call me? And I heard from young people saying, I felt ashamed, that I felt that I had screwed up because I had left and things were good. I had the independence, and I felt like I had failed.
Inspired by these stories, Dr. Holtschneider set out to create lasting support. Her approach applies what she calls accompaniment, in which folks are never simply left to their own devices, but rather continuously connected to a network of support. For years and years after they leave direct care, individuals are checked in on. The LYTE Collective, now with a physical drop-in center, gives comprehensive connections beyond housing support, be it healthcare, lawyers, childcare, you name it.
Thanks, Jeb. I just wanted to I want to say that Dr. Bertani is the one who introduced the concept of an accompaniment into my life, and probably Carl's life as well. And your legacy lives on. So it is really cool to have you.
It's just been wonderful, actually, to watch what you're doing and what you're building. It's and of course, that's Paul Farmer's concept, right. And he died a year ago. I was in one of these about his death a couple of days ago. But I have been so impressed with how long you all have been working on this. And of course, I knew Carl when he was just a student, right? But I really think that this is such a wonderful example of constructive non-cooperation. The system isn't working at all. And so what we're going to do is we're going to build our own. And we're going to try to pull in the resources that the system is wasting anyway in so many cases. So I think this is the most exciting thing that I've heard with this population, which I've had different ways of contact with for 50 years. I just am so pleased. And when I've heard what Shawne is doing, that's remarkable. When I see what you've been able to do in the physical setting, spectacular. So thank you for sharing that information.
Thank you. It's so fun to put you on the spot for once. As we think about that piece, though, and what we have been trying to build and trying to be really intentional about it, Shawne, I'll start with you, and maybe Jeb will cue up another clip here, because something that Shawne has really driven into light and driven into each one of us, I think, is about the power of spaces, about the intentionality and the power of place and what we build and how people feel in that space and how transformative that can be, or how deeply harmful that can be, right? And the power of space is something you have really brought to LYTE Collective. And I'm wondering, as we think about like what you're excited about, what we do here, and Carl, you too, I'm going to come to you right after. But Jeb, maybe we can play that last clip up there with Shawne about your work, and then dive into what that's about.
Happy to do it. Let me get that pulled up here. Yeah, and just once again, just a little bit of extra context for the clip itself. So in this portion, it was during a conversation Shawne and I were having about basically when they were experiencing this these kind of these moments of housing instability, and trying to just basically find places that you could just fit in and just feel normal and just do the normal life stuff that she was able to do pre this housing instability. And what will lead into ultimately with that is how kind of this helped inspire a portion of the LYTE Collective as well. So let's play that now.
And so in those moments, those are the times where it's like, okay, where do I go? And it's like, I don't want to go to the library again because that's where everybody else is. So let's hang out at Starbucks, because I feel like if I go there for 1 second, it will kind of take me away from what it is that I'm going through, because it'll make me feel like I'm a part of this, I'm a part of the community, because that's what regular people do. I didn't feel regular because of what I was going through. And I wanted to feel regular because I didn't want to think about what I was going through. And for me, going to like spaces like that would help me with that.
Thank you, Jeb. Yeah, I mean, Shawne, just as you think about that, and also as a lead into like what you are building here. I mean, we were sitting in our kitchen at the LYTE Lounge, that Shawne is really been our visionary around this. And I'm just wondering, yeah, if you can talk a little bit about why is it this way? Why does it look the way that it does? And as you think about the spaces and what's important, and more about that clip.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I go into that, I definitely want to kind of dive into the clip that Casey was kind of going over, because that was definitely something that I've experienced myself. So again, I had reached a point where I got into a program where I was actually able to find stabilization. Like, I went through the whole TLP transitional living program, and I was able to get housed, independent living. And pretty much that success story that you hope to have to hear from young people is like, okay, we got people stabilized, and they're living, they're basically happily ever after. And unfortunately, I messed up, and I felt that shame that after I accomplished all these things, actually accomplishing what I set out to when starting this journey, and now just all that's gone now, and I have to start over. I did feel that shame where it's like, okay, that was my one shot and I messed it up, so I'm just gonna have to figure it out. And I did have that experience, and I was trying to figure it out, and it took me a long time. I was on that waiting list where you have to call every 30 days to let them know, like, yeah, I'm still interested, still still going through something, keep me on the list. I had that experience where I was on a waiting list for 4 years, and they finally called me, only to go through another process, and then it just got a dead end. I've experienced all those things, but I never thought to just reach back out to anybody because I felt that once I went through that system, that was it. And for me, having that accompaniment here was very important because we definitely don't think about that we are entitled to having second chances because things in life happen. We mess up, we make poor decisions, and that's okay, whether it's our doing or whether it's something that's out of our control. It happens. And the most important thing to have is to be able to have a space where if you mess up one time, three times, five times, you can still have a space where people can come and like you're always welcome until you get it right. Like, okay, you can go through it, you can be successful. All right, you mess up, you can come back, we'll start over. And having that space was very important. And that's exactly what LYTE actually brought. Like, honestly, like my journey back here was that experience. Like, I was on a waiting list since 2017, and I had finally got a call back last year that I reached the top of the waiting list. And unfortunately, I'm thinking like, oh, that means, like Carl said, that means, oh, I'm about to get placed in housing. And at this time, I was dealing with more adversities that had occurred within those 5 or 6 years after I pretty much, aged out or left the program that I was doing so well in. And like, it was kind of like a finally, because I'm going through a lot of stuff. And also at this time, we're in the middle of something that's globally like so it on top of like what I'm already experiencing and then what is happening in the world, which is bringing extra like mental like distraught. So just imagine what people are experiencing now that are having to go through these barriers in that space where all these things are happening in the world globally. And that's what I was dealing with. So having this false hope that I was going to get housed and I was going to get out of this situation at that time after waiting so long only to get another dead end was very devastating. And literally, when I got reconnected to the people here at LYTE Collective, which was Dre and Megan, I literally got housed as soon as I connected to them. And yes, that's the goal that we want to achieve for everybody, but that's just a telltale story of how the system itself, it it needs work. And LYTE Collective, like I feel like that's kind of like what our future is. It's tackling issues right then and there. And so with that, because they gave me that, I had an opportunity to actually take everything that I learned in my journey, not just my experience going through the system, but just my passions, my craft, my creativity, and develop something for them based on what I've experienced. And that's kind of where I got the concept of LYTE Cafe, is that in those experiences that I had, I felt that I didn't want to think about what I was going through because I just wanted to focus on just continuing on my life, even though, I was doing good, but then these things happened and I didn't want to think about that. I'm like, I'm just going to continue on as if this isn't happening. And for me, spaces like going to a coffee shop, ordering a cup of coffee, and writing paper, like writing on a piece of paper, that's what made me kind of like delete that out of my experience. And that's kind of like where I got the concept of the cafe. It's like I realized like instead of just kind of faking it, why not actually create a space just like that in this facility where people can come in and not pretend to feel like they're not going through something, but actually have a space where they don't have to think about it in a capacity where it welcomes like um, it welcomes productivity, it welcomes peace, it welcomes a sense of relief, a sense of being like de-stressed from the circumstances. Because that's what I was doing. In a way, I was kind of trying to de-stress myself from it by just kind of putting myself in that community, like putting myself back in that community by going to these small places. And for a minute, it kind of alleviated that. But that's what I thought about, like when I first got into this space. Like I actually was excited, like, oh my gosh, like I actually want to help them, you know, do something different, do something new. Because on top of like, you know, trauma that we deal with, that we're trying to get out of, going through these systems can create trauma. Experiencing even things that people don't think about, like how they're fed, that's traumatizing, because there's no sense of like purpose, there's no sense of care that a lot of young people go through when they're in these shelters, when they're in these systems. It's like you're just going to take what we give you, you're just going to deal with it, you know. And my goal is to like kind of restructure that in a way where they don't have to feel like that when they come into this space. Like they want to, like I want them to want to come here, not feel like they have to come here because of what they're going through. Like I want them to be excited that, yo, we're going to the LYTE Cafe because we're gonna work on these goals, we're gonna talk, and we're gonna get things done. And it's gonna give them a sense of like it's gonna happen, and give them that hope versus like that obligation, like I got to get out of this situation. I have, because that's mentally draining. Like it's distressful. It's distraught, especially when you get this false hope that never mind, you're not getting it. It's distressing. So the least that we can do is provide a space where they don't have to feel like they're just like this is just a stressful situation, even though it is. But we're trying to alleviate that as much as possible by just creating that energy that kind of really like alleviates that, and also for them to have like a good meal to eat, a hot meal that's right? Actually that's made with care. Like we're not just throwing you things, that we're actually giving you choices. We're actually thinking about what you want versus just giving you what we got for you.
Can I bring in
Yeah,
Carl?
absolutely.
Carl, I see you nodding through this whole thing.
Yeah,
And so I just, as we're kind of getting near the end, I would just love, like if you a couple of minutes about just what you're excited about and the work that's happening.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, definitely. And
I was like, no, did you see? It was like, yes. Okay.
I was nodding like crazy. I don't know if you can see me, but I want to make sure to celebrate though what Shawne was just saying, that, you know, and I agree. I saw that Peggy mentioned, you know, Shawne, you're amazing. I agree. The things that Shawne is not mentioning is that entire kitchen is run by Shawne now. And so it's like all the meals, all of the, you know, the thought process of like making these, you know, continental breakfasts so people can just kind of pick and choose what they want. And also, like, if you go in there at the right time, Shawne's making food like wraps and quesadillas. Like, we'll cook it up for you right there for anyone who sits down. I mean, that is like, I feel like that cannot be lost in the fact that it's not just a cafe. I feel like just calling it a cafe kind of leaves off a lot of the extra work that Shawne's doing. So I want to make sure that props was there.
Thank you.
And to build on that too, that I think Shawne definitely sort of spelled this out beautifully, but that it's not just about making a space that is where you go when you have a crisis. It's about a place where you can go every day, right? And maybe you're coming in to play basketball, maybe you're coming in to work in the music studio, maybe you're coming in to speak with someone around some really heavy stuff that's happening in your life. But you don't have to feel shame about coming through the doors, because some days is good days, some days is bad days, but LYTE's always open and it's always there. And so making that space available to you anytime, you bring your true self in, however you're feeling, and we're there. That's what I love about that. And I think, and I also lean heavily into the arts. I think that is something that in this field, having done this for a long time, that it's like one of those things that gets cut when budgets get really tight, is like all the cool creative stuff that happens is like, we got to focus on like the beds and the meals, which are important, but I think that we really miss on that vital stuff. So having, you know, a painting studio and having a recording studio and music and all those things and a gorgeous gym, that's the stuff that I think is about reframing. And to get back to what Dr. Matani said, it's like you don't cooperate in a system that's not benefiting anyone. You have to make your own thing, and you got to start from the ground up. And that's what we did, and that's what we're doing. So yeah, I think we've done some really good stuff here, but and more to come. You know, Shawne's always making some good stuff. So
thank you, Carl. On sort of, as Jeb, I do want to give you the last word. This is your podcast that really you have put into the world, and we're so excited. But we hope that people will actually listen to the full episode and hear more brilliance from Carl and Shawne and Jeb. And I did want to mention too, I know like Dr. Matani, you are not local, but anybody in Chicago right now, it is election season. There are very important decisions that the mayor and the city council make around funding for homelessness. In particular, there is a campaign called Bring Chicago Home, which is sponsored by the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, which is been a really, really hard fight. And it's such a brilliant, brilliant thing in which they would actually use the real estate transfer tax for real estate transactions, only those that are over $1 million. They would take about 1.9 percentage points off of that directly into a fund that would equal about $160 million a year to address homelessness in the city and make sure that people aren't waiting 1,500 days. I mean, so there is real, and your mayoral candidates, if you do live in the city, people are being asked to take stands. People have positions on this, and so it really does matter. And so I just wanted to give a little plug there that February 28th is voting day, and that campaigns like Bring Chicago Home and the work of the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless are just so critical to us being able to make this stop, right? To get people into housing. We can do so much better. I want to thank you, Carl and Shawne, so much, and Jeb, truly the opportunity to partner with you on this. Every one of us just said how remarkable and what a gift it was to get to know you. And I do just want to give you the last word here, kind of, as this is your baby kind of putting out into the universe. Anything that you're thinking of as we close out?
I think, first of all, that's very kind. The words are very kind, and it most certainly extends back towards you guys. I've been nothing but grateful for your time and your care that all of you have given to me. It's been really, really a pretty miraculous thing. I mean, to trust me with your stories and with your insights, I know how much how much vulnerability that creates. So I really appreciate your trust in me. So yeah, just wanted to say that, and how just valuable everything that you have given me has been. It's been incredible. And I guess the note that I would end on is that, in spite of all of these issues that we've kind of gone over, the thing that I was left feeling from my conversations with all of you is it doesn't mean it's all for nothing. And like you said, with these this upcoming election and with the work of LYTE, these changes are not outside of our grasp, is the main thing that I have come to see. And I want to, I guess, end it somewhat on that note of that we do have the tools to make these changes. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jeb, and all of you that are involved for having us and to help kind of expose like what it is that we're trying to do to alleviate these issues. Like, we really, really appreciate it, for sure.
Thank you.
That was such a quick hour. That was so fast.
Right?
I
Yeah.
feel like I have so many more questions. We're gonna have to do another episode of the podcast. We'll dive in. Thank you all so very much for joining us, and tell your friends. We recorded this, so if we want to, let people know about this, and obviously the larger podcast, and we'll get it up on our website and social media and sharing those friends. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, everyone.